Wake Forest. I'm Karen Guy, an Extension Master Gardener Volunteer here in Wake County. And today we're going to be talking about container gardening. Container gardening is a great way for anybody to grow just about anything. You can grow ornamentals, you can grow vegetables, whether you have an estate or a small apartment with a balcony. Container gardening is an easy way to get a lot of joy with a little effort because you can control most of the conditions. So today I'm going to be doing a demonstration and talking about some of the things you need to consider when you're potting up plants. And that's going to include container options, potting soil, fertilizer, light, and watering. So we've got some pictures here, some pretty containers. On the left, you've got a simple arrangement. It's the same color pot in the same style. You've got two different plants, some pretty orange pansies and some ryegrass, but you can see that the gardener has arranged this in a unique way, so it gives a lot of visual interest. In the next picture, you've got a container that has three different plants, and this is a recipe that you may commonly see. There's a thriller, a big plant in the center, a filler, a smaller plant along the side, in this case it's New Guinea impatiens, and then a spiller, and that's this golden creeping Jenny in this pot. So that's a good thing that you can do. You can find recipes online for different plants with the thriller, spiller, filler. And here's a cute idea. Somebody's taken children's rain boots and created containers. It doesn't have to be a traditional pot. You can use your imagination. In this case, somebody's taken an old shoe rack and they've potted up herbs. So they've got a vertical garden. And another, they've taken rain gutters from a house, and they've applied them to the side of a shed. And they're growing edibles, lettuces in there. So that's really unique. And then another one, we have a window box where somebody's put in edible plants, but used them in an ornamental way. So you've got some Swiss chard back there. And then you've got a very casual vegetable garden here. These are Irish potatoes that are being grown in just a grow bag. So you can use just about anything. 5-gallon big plastic buckets are often used to grow tomatoes. You need usually at least a 5-gallon bucket if you're going to grow vegetables. But whatever you do, your container must have drainage. So now we're going to do a demonstration. You can see in this pot that there are big drainage holes, which is wonderful. However, we need to cover these up a little bit. So what I've done is I found some material. It's actually tape that uses drywall, and I've cut it into pieces. I'm going to put a couple of these. They're a little sticky, so they stay at the bottom of the pot, and that's going to hold the soil in. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to install any gravel at the bottom. That's something that we were told to do in the past, is put gravel with the idea that it was going to help drainage. But we now know that that actually does the opposite. It actually reduces drainage. Because of the nature of water, it raises the perched water table so the roots stay wetter at the bottom. It's kind of counterintuitive. If you're really interested, you can find experiments on YouTube where they show and they prove to naysayers that adding gravel actually reduces drainage in the soil. So we're not going to add anything. We also want the plant roots to have as much depth as possible. So this is not a super deep container. I'm really not worried about how much soil it's going to take to fill it up. So I'm going to just start applying it. So I keep my potting soil in a big bucket, because sometimes what I'll do is I'll have a pot that at the very bottom, the potting soil is still good from last year. So I'll recycle it and I'll put it in here with some new potting soil. And this is potting soil. It's not regular garden soil. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I'm just going to go ahead and start filling this and fill the bottom. And this is slightly moist already. You don't want to use dry soil. And if we were out in a garden where I can make more of a mess, I would probably start adding a little bit of water right now. We're not going to do that here, but I do have my pretend watering can, and I would start to water it in a little bit to get the moisture all the way through the potting soil, because it's harder to do if you wait until you've completely filled the pot. And we're going to start to put plants in. Now, I have a feeling there's not a lot of roots to this, so you got to be pretty careful when you take this out. Sometimes I'll even break the pot, but yeah, this one's not too bad. Just gonna leave that here. But you can see the white roots, it's pretty healthy. It actually goes pretty far down. And I'm gonna put that here, over here, and I've got some mums, but I'm gonna go ahead, I'm being really careful here, taking it out of the pot, and because these break very easily and the tags stay attached. So something that I want to mention as I'm filling this up is that I'm really not tamping down the soil. I'm gonna let water do that job for me. Like we talked about in the soil testing video, the Idea soil has quite a bit of air and pore space, so I'm not gonna compact this, okay? Just gonna fill it up here. It's taking a little bit of time. So I'll talk to you about. This potting soil does not have any fertilizer built into it already. When you buy your potting soil, sometimes you'll see it's got moisture control in there, and it's got fertilizer already built in. This is my personal preference. I just like to, I'm a bit of a control nut. I like to know what is in my soil, so I apply my own fertilizer as I'm going. And this is one of my favorites for container gardens because you can put it in and it lasts for several months. It is a polymer coated fertilizer. So basically there's different coatings on the fertilizer. Some of them have heavy coatings, some of them have lighter. So as water goes over it, those coatings are reduced, they wear down, and the fertilizer becomes available. So a little this time, and then as the bigger particles break down, more next time. So it can last for 3 months. This is a great product. There's other brands, but that's one of the more common brands that you'll find. Okay, so we've got a few more plants here. I would fill this up. In the interest of time, we'll just kind of put that in here and imagine that it's finished. Well, it's not quite finished. I would be watering this in, right? Filling this in, and then my next step is to mulch. And you'll notice in this pot we have plenty of room. This is called the reservoir space. We've got plenty of room to add mulch and still add water without it coming over the top. So I've got a bag of triple shredded hardwood mulch, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna apply it. I wouldn't do this for cactus because they're not gonna appreciate the moisture, but for these plants, I'm gonna add this. And here's a tip. If you've got some of those annoying trees in your yard that put out these spiky gumballs, and you've got squirrels like I do, there you go. Now there's a purpose for these. I add these to the top of planters all over my yard, and they really save me a lot of headache. They do seem to work for my squirrels anyway. So there you go. There would be my finished container. And I would water this in really well. You want to use about half the amount of water that it would take to fill this container. So I would probably use a couple gallons. Let it soak all the way through, let it run out the bottom, make sure that the drainage is working really well, and then I'd water it again so that you know that the roots have really gotten that good hydration. And I just wanted to say one more thing. In this case, none of the roots were root bound. If you do have a root bound plant, it's okay to tease this out to let the roots kind of expand around the pot. But there's our container garden. And next we're going to talk about a couple of options when you choose a container. This is a plastic container. I like the color because it kind of mimics terracotta. But there are a lot of options, and we're going to show you up here on the screen. So when you choose a container, you kind of have options between porous and non-porous material. Porous material is better if you've got cactus or Mediterranean type plants like herbs. They like porous. And porous includes clay and terracotta. It's a classic pot material. It's been around for a long time, but it's not really winter safe, so you have to empty it out or you're going to see cracks. So it dries out quickly is another problem with it, which is great. Like I said, if you have cactus or you have Mediterranean herbs, you're going to have to water more frequently though. Concrete is another option. It is porous, And I love this idea. Somebody has created a jack-o'-lantern mold. They took those plastic buckets that kids use to get their Halloween candy, and they used it as a mold and created their own planter. One thing, make sure you make a hole for drainage if you're going to do this. And in the other image, we have a very modern square planter. Looks great if that's your aesthetic, and they've added a very modern plant in there with some gravel mulch, so that whole idea looks beautiful together. Very well thought out. And then you've got wood. This is a semi-porous material. It's wonderful if you're looking for a casual look and be really charming. It'll last for several seasons, but then you may have to replace it. You can think about painting it. If you do, I would only grow ornamentals. I'd be careful of any kind of treatment if you're going to be growing edible plants. Just make sure that it's non-toxic and safe and isn't going to impact your, the health of the food that you're growing. And then you've got glazed. And glazed, there's so many different choices. It can be expensive. If you have the right kind of glaze on it, it can last out in the winter, especially if it says kind of frost proof on the label. So it holds moisture longer, and it can be very heavy though. So that's one of the drawbacks. And then next we've got plastic and fiberglass. This is non-porous, and there are so many different options. Some of the fiberglass could really mimic metal even. It looks like terracotta. It's like foamy, it feels foamy, and it's super light. Sometimes that's a problem though. It can be so light, a big container with a large plant, that it'll tip over. So you have to think about anchoring it if you're going to use that kind of container. And then we've got this absolutely adorable idea. Somebody's taken a child's toy and they've turned it into a little pot for a succulent. So you can be very creative with containers. And then we've got another non-porous. This is metal. Very stately looking, very elegant. I wouldn't use this for edibles though, because of the metal content can leach into the soil. And then something to think about, is this going to be temporary, a seasonal display, or is this permanent? We've got bonsais out here in the snow, so obviously that's a permanent planting, and those are specially glazed containers that can withstand those cold temperatures. I grow trees in different containers. I have areas in my yard where the soil isn't so good, and maybe there's like a utility that I want to mask, so I grow trees in containers, and I will use big plastic pots because they are winter safe. Okay. So next, just a brief overview of the components of potting media. So potting soil isn't really soil. There's no garden soil in it. It tends to be fine bark. It tends to be what it's mostly made out of, fine bark fines. And then it's got to have high permeability of water, which means it's got larger particles and pore spaces, which allow a rapid percolation of water and air. It's got small particles and pore spaces that will hold water, so it improves the water retention compared to like our clay soil. And it's got great drainage as well. If you use just garden soil, your plants are not going to grow. They'll die because their roots cannot get enough air and enough water. So again, some important things to look at. Aeration, you want potting soil that's lightweight, you want a fertile mix, and you want something that's pasteurized, meaning that it's mostly free of weed seeds, insects, and diseases. And that's most commercial potting mixes that you can find. We did talk a little bit about whether you put fertilizer in your potting soil. My preference is to do it myself. You can find fertilizer already built into your potting mix. Just remember that's there, so if you're fertilizing and there's fertilizer in your potting soil, you could be causing a problem. So just remember, and for me, I can't remember if that pot was the one with the fertilizer and that one wasn't, so I just don't use it at all, but it's up to you. And here's a close-up of the label of potting soil. In this case, you can see this potassium polyacrylate copolymer. That's indicating that there is fertilizer in this. And it gives you all the different ingredients. This is pretty typical. You'll see perlite, lime fertilizer, a wetting agent. So it's kind of interesting to see, read the label on your potting soil to see what it's made out of. Okay, so as gardeners, we tend to think of things that we can control, like potting soil and fertilizer. But if you're a plant, the most important part of your growing is sunlight. So if you buy plants that are labeled for full sun, that means at least 6 hours of full sunlight. If you don't have that, your plants are just not going to grow optimally. So full sun is greater than 6 hours. Part sun or part shade is 3 to 6 hours. And in our area, it's typically morning sun is the best. It's not quite as hot, and then afternoon shade. And then shade, that's little to no direct sunlight at all. You really want to protect those plants from direct sunlight. And here's a picture of photosynthesis, and it says 94% of growth occurs from the sun. And then a little bit about fertilizer. There's basically two choices you have to make. You can go organic, or you can stay with chemicals as synthetic. And the big difference when you make that choice is, when are you fertilizing? Are you fertilizing a few months before you're planting your vegetables? Then organic's going to really work for you. But if you want instant results, it's going to take organic fertilizer a while to break down to become available to the plant roots. Microorganisms have to work on it before it's available. So the chemical fertilizers, you know, the blue stuff that's water soluble, is instantly available. So those are kind of your choices. If you do decide to go organic, start your research early. Start preparing your soil before you plant, so those nutrients will be available at the right time for your plants and your flowers and your vegetables. And a word of caution, of course, is not to over-fertilize. The companies that put out fertilizer spend a lot of time figuring out what the dosage should be, and I really, I trust them, I follow that. If you over-apply fertilizer and you think you're feeding your plants, you could actually be damaging them. In this image, we've got a leaf that's got fertilizer burn. So what's happened is, there's so many fertilizer salts in the soil that the water uptake has been disrupted. So how does water get to the top of a redwood tree? There's no pump, there's no heart in this tree. Well, part of it is the nature of water. The molecules cling to each other. So as one molecule leaves the needles of that tree, the next one comes to take its place. So they're just chaining up the tree. Now, if you do this in a pot and you add a lot of fertilizer, you break that chain, and the leaves will actually get fertilizer burn. They're drying out because there's not enough moisture there. So if you've done that and it's a container, you can water and water and water and try to flush out that extra fertilizer, and then you've learned your lesson. You're not going to do it again. I've definitely done it myself. You think you're doing a good thing, but you're actually hurting your plants. So fertilize weekly. Weekly is the saying. So just a week amount of fertilizer, but fertilize every single week in a container garden, and you'll be much safer, much happier with the results. So just to summarize some quick tips, potting media, you're not going to use garden soil, you're going to use potting media. You can make your own, that's a little more challenging, but you can buy quite a few different brands out there. You want to leave enough space at the top of your container. You don't want it too deep, because actually you could cause some problems. And especially in a metal pot, it could heat up the plants. But you do want a reservoir here, so when you water, it stays in the pot. Don't bury the crown of the plant. So here I'm mulching, but I'm not going to bury this because that can lead to some rot problems around the base. It's the same when you mulch a tree. You don't want to go all the way up to the tree either. Let's see, water the plants. So I'm going to water this probably 3 times and make sure the water is draining properly before I leave it alone and walk away. And then mulch containers. And those are our tips today. I'm Karen Guy. I'm an Extension Master Gardener in Wake County, and thank you for listening. Look forward to talking to you again.